the squeak of a trolley wheel, the smell of fresh bread, and the friendly nod from a cashier who knew your name. Supermarket shopping in 1970s. Britain was as much about people as it was about groceries. Saturdays meant piling into the car, list in hand, ready for shelves lined with familiar brands and bold signage. These stores had character, each with its own feel, and many are now gone. Let's step back in time and remember 10 of the most popular supermarkets that defined a generation of British shopping. In the 1970s, Find Fare stood as one of Britain's largest and most recognizable supermarket chains, its bold yellow and black logo a familiar sight in towns across the country. Stepping inside felt modern for the time. Wide aisles, bright fluorescent lighting, and neatly stacked shelves that seemed to stretch on forever. For many families, Find Fare was the place for the big Saturday shop. Parents would push sturdy metal trolleys past the bread counter, where the smell of freshly baked loaves drifted into the aisles, while children begged for a packet of biscuits or eyed the pick-and-mix sweets near the tills. The store's layout made shopping feel spacious and organized, a contrast to the cramped corner shops that still dotted many high streets. Special offers were printed in bold on large signs, often encouraging shoppers to stock up on household essentials. In smaller towns, a Find Fare branch could be the social hub of the weekend. You might bump into neighbors or catch up on local news while waiting in the queue. By the late 1980s, the Find Fare name disappeared after being bought out and rebranded. But for those who remember it, the image of those bright yellow carrier bags and the soft mechanical clatter of the tills is a vivid reminder of a simpler, friendlier era of British shopping. In an age when most British supermarkets stocked only familiar homegrown goods, international stores stood out as a gateway to the wider world. Walking through its doors in the 1970s felt like stepping into something just a little more adventurous. The shelves carried everyday staples, yes, but also treasures that seemed exotic at the time. Jars of Italian pasta sauce, tins of French pâté, Swiss chocolate bars, and coffee that smelled richer than anything from the local grocer. For many shoppers, this was their first taste of European flavors beyond the family holiday. The name itself, international, added a certain glamour, hinting at far-off places and new tastes to discover. The layout was practical, the prices competitive, but the real magic was in the little discoveries tucked between the British brands. Kids might spot a brightly wrapped foreign sweet they'd never tried, while parents browsed unfamiliar cheeses or herbs that promised to liven up the week's dinners. It wasn't just about shopping, it was about curiosity and the feeling of bringing home something special. Over time, as imported goods became commonplace in every supermarket, international stores lost the uniqueness that had made it special, eventually being absorbed into larger chains. But for those who remember, it was the place where a weekly shop could feel like a miniature trip abroad. Victor Value was the supermarket for families who needed to stretch every pound, and in 1970s, Britain that meant it became a trusted name in countless working-class neighborhoods. Its bright blue branding and no-nonsense pricing made it instantly recognizable, and stepping inside, you knew you were in a place where value came first. The aisles were narrower than some of the more upmarket stores, and the shelves were stacked high with tins, packets, and boxes in simple, bold packaging. There were no frills here, no in-store bakeries or fancy displays, but there was a certain honesty in the way Victor Value did things. You came for your essentials: bags of sugar, boxes of tea, loaves of sliced bread, and affordable cuts of meat wrapped in butcher's paper. Parents liked it because you could fill a trolley without emptying your wallet, and children knew there might still be a few pennies left for a treat from the sweet counter by the tills. The staff were often locals, greeting customers by name and keeping the store running with a down-to-earth efficiency. It was the kind of place where you'd hear snippets of local gossip as people queued, the clink of glass milk bottles mingling with the steady beep of the tills. Victor Value wasn't trying to be glamorous. It was practical, dependable, and unpretentious. By the late 1970s, the chain had been bought out by Tesco, and the name slowly disappeared from the high street. But for those who remember, Victor Value was more than just a budget store. It was part of the weekly rhythm of life, a place where a careful shop could still feel satisfying, and where the blue logo on the carrier bag was a quiet badge of thrift and common sense. Gateway arrived in the 1970s, Britain with a look and feel that set it apart from the supermarkets most people were used to. Its green and orange logo stood out against the grey of many high streets, and stepping through its doors felt just a touch more modern, a little more polished than the budget chains. Gateway positioned itself as a step up, the place where you might find a slightly wider choice, cleaner displays, and a shopping experience that felt organized and fresh. The aisles were well lit, the produce neatly arranged, and there was a quiet pride in the presentation. For families, a trip to Gateway could feel like treating yourself without going overboard. The bakery section was warm and inviting, the smell of fresh rolls drifting towards the entrance, while the chilled counters displayed neat rows of cheeses, cold meats, and dairy that seemed just a bit more varied than elsewhere. Shoppers could still pick up their tins of beans and boxes of cereal, but there was a sense that Gateway was trying to bring something new to the British shopping scene, a bridge between the no-frills stores and the premium food halls. Many remember the chain as having a certain charm, with friendly staff and a tidy, well-run atmosphere. In the 1980s, Gateway would rebrand and expand, eventually disappearing under new names like Summerfield. But for those who recall its early years, the sight of that green and orange sign brings back memories of a time when supermarkets were beginning to change, becoming more than just places to grab your groceries. They were evolving into destinations in their own right. In the 1970s, Lipton's wasn't just a name on a box of tea, it was a familiar sight on the high street, a warm and welcoming supermarket that blended the feel of a traditional grocer with the convenience of modern self-service. Walking into Lipton's felt almost homely. The air carried the comforting scent of freshly ground coffee and loose tea leaves, mingled with the sweetness of biscuits stacked neatly on shelves. Counters displayed bacon and cheese, cut to order, while jars of jam and tins of treacle lined the aisles in tidy rows. The branding was cheerful and familiar, often accented in bold reds and yellows, and it gave the store a personality that made it feel approachable. Shoppers would greet staff by name, exchanging quick bits of news before moving along with their baskets. It was the kind of place where you might pick up your weekly essentials, but also pause to treat yourself to something special, perhaps a tin of imported biscuits or a slab of fruitcake. Lipton's had a knack for feeling both dependable and a little indulgent, a balance that made it a favorite for many families. While bigger supermarket chains eventually swallowed up the smaller, friendly shops, and Lipton's grocery stores faded away, the memory of walking through those doors remains vivid for those who lived it. The rustle of paper bags, the sight of stacked tea boxes, and the knowledge that you'd always find a familiar face behind the counter made Lipton's more than just a shop. It was part of the fabric of everyday life. International Spa in the 1970s had a personality all its own. Smaller than the big supermarket chains, but filled with a sense of community. Often tucked into neighborhood corners or along busy high streets, Spa stores were compact, efficient, and friendly, the kind of place you could pop into on your way home from work or school and be greeted by name. The aisles were narrow, but every inch of space was used wisely. You'd find neat displays of bread, milk, tinned goods, and fresh produce, all arranged in a way that made it easy to grab what you needed without wandering for hours. The Spa brand was European in origin, and it brought with it a slightly different style from purely British chains. Practical, a bit continental, but still deeply rooted in local service. Many branches were run almost like independent shops, with staff who lived nearby and understood their customers' needs. Kids loved them because there was always a tempting rack of sweets near the till, while adults appreciated being able to get both the essentials and the odd special item without making a big trip. The familiar red and white logo became a welcome sight, promising reliability no matter where you were. In an era before the dominance of massive out-of-town superstores, international Spa thrived by being close, convenient, and personal. Today, Spa still exists, but those smaller 1970s branches had a charm that modern convenience stores rarely match. A place where shopping wasn't just a task, but a quick, pleasant moment of connection in your day. In the 1970s, co-op superstores carried more than just groceries. They carried a sense of belonging. The cooperative movement had deep roots in Britain, built on the idea that the members owned the store and shared in its success. That meant when you shopped there, you weren't just a customer, you were part of something bigger. Many will remember the distinctive dividend stamps you collected with each purchase, carefully sticking them into little books until you had enough to exchange for cash or goods. The stores themselves were practical and straightforward, often a bit plainer than flashier competitors, but they had a warmth all their own. Wide aisles held everything from fresh bread and vegetables to household essentials, and the bakery counters often tempted shoppers with loaves still warm from the oven. Staff were friendly, sometimes even neighbors, and there was a quiet trust in the way people shopped there. The co-op had a reputation for fair prices, decent quality, and a business model that gave back to its community, something that felt different from the corporate chains moving in. Children might remember tagging along, peering over the counters at jars of sweets, while parents filled their baskets knowing they were supporting a shared cause. Over time, the co-op would modernize and evolve, but those 1970s superstores hold a special place in memory. They weren't just about filling a trolley, they were about taking part in a tradition, one that reminded you that shopping could still have a human touch. In the 1970s, Tesco was a very different beast from the sprawling megastores we know today. Back then, its slogan, "Pile it high, sell it cheap," wasn't just marketing, it was the truth. Walking into a 70s Tesco meant being greeted by towering stacks of tins, boxes, and packets, often arranged in no-nonsense rows that shouted value rather than style. The fluorescent lighting was bright and a little harsh, the floors were plain, and the decor was minimal, but that didn't matter. People came for the bargains. This was an era when Tesco was still building its identity, leaning heavily into the budget-conscious shopper who wanted to stretch every penny. You might remember the slightly chaotic feel of the stores, with stock piled high in cardboard displays and special offers plastered on bold, simple signs. There was a certain excitement in spotting a deal, knowing you were getting more for less. Parents could fill a trolley without breaking the bank, and kids would linger by the sweets aisle, hoping for a treat. Tesco in the 70s didn't pretend to be glamorous, but it was direct, affordable, and unpretentious, a place where working families could do their full shop and still have change left over. Over the decades, Tesco transformed into a polished retail giant, but those early stores had a raw, bustling energy that spoke to a very different time in British shopping. It was simple, it was scrappy, and for many, it was exactly what they needed. When Safeway arrived in Britain, it brought with it an unmistakable American flair. Opening its first UK store in the 1960s and expanding through the 1970s, it felt fresh, modern, and just a bit glamorous compared to the more traditional British chains. Safeway stores were bright and spacious, with wide aisles that made pushing a trolley feel almost luxurious. Their product range was impressive for the time, mixing familiar British staples with imported items that gave a hint of international style. Safeway was one of the early adopters of bold in-store marketing, eye-catching end-of-aisle displays, colorful signage, and frequent special offers designed to make you feel like you were getting something special. The bakery counters smelled heavenly, the deli sections were well stocked, and the fresh produce looked like it had been arranged with extra care. For many shoppers, especially in suburban areas, going to Safeway felt like an event rather than just a chore. It was the kind of place where you might try something new, whether that was a different type of cheese, a ready-made meal, or an imported snack you couldn't find elsewhere. Over time, as competition grew and the market shifted, Safeway would lose its unique sparkle and eventually disappear from the UK altogether. But for those who remember the 1970s version, it was more than just a supermarket. It was a little taste of something exciting and new in everyday life. In the 1970s, Bejam wasn't your typical supermarket. It was a frozen food wonderland. At a time when most people's freezers were small and frozen meals were still a novelty, Bejam made them the star of the show. Walking through its doors meant being greeted by long rows of chest freezers, each one packed with colorful boxes promising convenience and a modern way of eating. There were frozen peas and fish fingers, of course, but also ready-made pies, ice creams, and even exotic treats like prawn cocktails or gâteau that looked fit for a dinner party. For busy families, Bejam was a revelation. You could stock up on food that would last for weeks, cutting down the number of shopping trips. The stores had a no-frills, practical feel, but that didn't matter, because what they offered felt like the future. Kids loved peering into the frosty freezers, while parents marveled at how easy it had suddenly become to put a meal on the table. In many ways, Bejam helped change British eating habits, making frozen food not just acceptable, but desirable. Over time, the novelty wore off as frozen sections became standard in all supermarkets, and Bejam itself was eventually taken over by Iceland. But for those who remember, it was a place where shopping felt like stepping into a new era, one where dinner was only ever a quick defrost away. Back in the 1970s, supermarkets had real character. From Bejam's frozen aisles to Tesco's pile-it-high chaos, each store had its own feel and loyal customers. They were places where Saturday shopping trips were a family event, and every chain left its mark on how Britain shopped and ate. Most are gone now, but the memories remain. Share your favorite in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more trips down memory lane.